The market square was full of whispers, the air heavy with dust and tension. At the center stood an alien girl, her wrists bound with iron cuffs that cut into her skin. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly under the twin suns, but they carried only fear. Around her, merchants, beggars, and guards gathered, their faces cold, waiting for judgment. The council elder raised his staff, his voice harsh and without mercy. "You owe 10,000 credits, he declared, "and you have no way to pay." The girl's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but her voice broke into silence. She had begged before, on her knees in front of these same men, but they had turned away. The punishment was cruel, older than memory, but the law demanded it. "You will be rented tonight," the elder said, his words echoing across the stones. 10 men, one after another, until the debt of your shame is paid. The crowd gasped, some laughing, some shaking their heads, but none daring to stop it. The girl's knees buckled and she collapsed onto the ground. Her long silver hair fell like a curtain around her tear-stained face. Her small hands gripped the dirt, trembling as though she could sink into the earth itself. She whispered, "Please, not this. Anything but this." But no one listened. The guards yanked her to her feet, chaining her to a post at the square's edge. Her body was thin, her dress torn, and her skin bore the marks of past beatings. The punishment was not about debt, it was about humiliation, to remind others that mercy had no place here. Only control. One by one, men stepped forward to look at her. Some laughed, others whispered dark things, their eyes burning with hunger. The girl felt her heart shrinking, each breath heavier than the last. She wished she could vanish, wished she could die before the night began. Among the crowd, however, stood a figure unlike the rest, a human man, tall, his clothes dusty from travel, his eyes shadowed beneath his hood. He said nothing, but his gaze never left the girl's trembling form. He watched as the elder raised his staff again, sealing her fate with the final words, "She belongs to the night." The elder declared, 10 men will take her, and by dawn her debt will be counted in full." The crowd cheered, the guards grinned, and the girl felt her heart shatter. Her chains rattled as she tried to pull back, but the iron cut deeper into her wrists. Her tears dripped onto the ground, each drop like a silent scream that no one heard. The human's jaw tightened, though no one noticed. He had seen punishments before. He had seen cruelty in many forms across the stars. But something about this girl, her small, broken voice, the hopeless fire in her eyes, ignited something inside him. It was not pity. It was not anger alone. It was something stronger, heavier, waiting to rise. The girl lifted her head weakly, her vision blurred through tears. For a moment, her eyes met the human's, and in that instant something shifted. She saw not hunger, not cruelty, but something different in his gaze. She could not name it, but it felt like warmth, a fragile spark in a night of coldness. The elder banged his staff once more, and the crowd began to scatter. The men chosen for the night prepared themselves, grinning like wolves. The guards tightened, the chains dragging the girl toward the waiting room where she would be held. Her feet scraped against the stone, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Please, someone help me." No one moved. No one spoke except the human who stepped slowly forward. His boots echoed against the square's stone floor, each step calm but firm. The guards turned their heads, surprised by his approach. The girl blinked, her tears pausing. For a moment, as if her soul itself waited for what he would do, the human's voice finally broke the silence, low and steady. "I will take the first turn," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd erupted in laughter, mocking his calm tone. But the girl's heart skipped a beat. Something inside her whispered that this was not the same as the others. And so the sentence was passed. The night of torment had begun. But within the chains of punishment, a story was about to unfold. A story that would change not only her fate, but his as well. For sometimes, in the darkest moments, love begins where no one expects it. The room where they locked her was dim, lit only by a single torch on the wall. The chains rattled each time she moved, the iron collar around her neck cold and heavy. Her heart pounded as footsteps echoed, Outside, each sound reminding her that the night had begun. She curled herself against the wall, trembling like a child, whispering prayers no one would hear. The guards laughed beyond the door, tossing dice and waiting for the chosen men. For them, this was just another punishment, just another body to be broken. The girl shut her eyes tight, trying to forget the crowd, the council, the cruel words. But her mind replayed them again and again until she thought she would break. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked open. Her breath caught, her body stiffened, and her fingers clutched the chain as if it could save her. A shadow filled the doorway, tall, silent, and calm. It was the human, the one who had spoken in the square, the one who had claimed the first turn. The guards grinned as he entered, pushing the door shut behind him. "Don't take too long." One of them laughed. 9 more are waiting. Their laughter echoed down the hall as the door closed, leaving only silence inside. The girl pressed her back against the wall, her eyes wide with terror, waiting for him to move. But the human did not move. He stood there for a long moment, watching her in the flickering torchlight. His hood was lowered now, revealing tired eyes, scarred cheeks, and a jaw set in quiet strength. She expected him to lunge at her, to tear at her clothes, to act like the others would. Instead, he spoke softly, his voice deep but steady. "What is your name?" he asked, his words gentle, almost out of place in that cruel chamber. The girl blinked, stunned by the question, her lips trembling as she whispered, Liara, she said, her voice breaking. "My name is Liara." The human nodded slowly, taking a step closer, but not too close. "I am Kyle," he said, his gaze holding hers. "I will not harm you." Her heart raced, her mind confused. She could not understand why he would say such a thing. Every man before had only seen her as an object, never a person. "You lie," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "All men lie here." Kale shook his head, kneeling down so that his eyes met hers at the same level. "I have seen too much suffering," he said, his voice low. "I will not add to it." His words were strange, almost unbelievable, yet they carried a weight that made her chest ache. For the first time in years, someone asked her name. Someone saw her as more than a punishment. Liara's tears slid down her cheeks, hot and endless. Her hands trembled as she touched the chain on her neck, whispering, "Why are you here? Why would you choose me?" Kale's eyes darkened, a shadow passing across his face. "I have traveled across many worlds," he said. "I have seen injustice wear many masks." He looked at her torn dress, her bruised arms, the way she shivered, even in still air. "And I have seen enough," he added. "Tonight I make a choice." Liara stared at him, struggling to believe his words. Was this a trick, another cruel game to make her lower her guard? Or was there truly something different in this human, something that set him apart? Her heart told her to fear, but a small, fragile hope whispered to listen. Kale reached into his cloak and pulled out a small piece of cloth. He dipped it into the water jug in the corner and carefully offered it to her. "Your face," he said softly. "Wipe your tears." Liara hesitated, then slowly reached out, her fingers brushing his hand as she took it. The cloth was rough, but the gesture was gentle, almost sacred. She pressed it to her cheeks, her sobs breaking free in the silence. Kale did not mock her, did not move closer. He simply sat across from her, as if he had all the time in the world, as if this moment mattered. The torch flickered, shadows dancing. Across the walls outside, the guards laughed again, their voices distant, unaware of the quiet rebellion inside. Liara lowered the cloth, her voice fragile as she whispered, "If you do not harm me, the others will. They will not be like you." Kyle's eyes sharpened, a storm hidden in their depths. "They will not touch you," he said, his tone carrying an unshakable promise. Liara's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs. But there are 9 more, she whispered. "You cannot stop them all." Kyle leaned forward, his voice a whisper meant only for her. "Watch me," he said, his words like steel wrapped in fire. Liara's tears returned, not from fear this time, but from something she could not name. Hope, fragile and dangerous, began to bloom in her chest. And so, in the torchlit room where punishment was meant to break her, Liara felt for the first time that she might not be alone. Cale's choice had changed everything. The first man did not take her body. He gave her back her name, and though the night of 10 had only just begun, something far greater had been set in motion. The night grew heavier as the torches outside flickered against the stone walls. Liara sat in silence, her chain rattling each time her body trembled. Cale remained across from her, his back straight, his eyes steady on her face. For the first time in her life she felt seen, not as a debt or punishment, but as a person. The door outside creaked again, boots stomping against the floor. The guards laughed as they banged on the door. "Time is up, human. Pass her on." Liara's heart froze, her body tensing as fear consumed her again. She looked at Cale, her lips shaking, expecting him to hand her over like all men would, but Cale did not rise. He turned his head toward the door, his jaw tight, his voice calm but sharp. "She stays," he said firmly, each word carrying a weight that silenced the laughter outside. The guards exchanged looks, confused, then burst into mocking laughter. "You think you can keep her?" One guard shouted, his voice dripping with scorn. "There are 9 more waiting, and you are just one man." Liara's eyes widened, her fear deepening. She whispered, "Please don't fight them, they'll kill you." But Cale only glanced, back at her, his expression unshaken. "Not while I still breathe." The guards kicked the door but did not enter. Not yet. Their voices carried down the hall as they muttered among themselves. Cale turned back to Liara, his face softer now, his mask of control breaking little by little. "Tell me," he said quietly, "how did this happen to you?" Liara hesitated, her chest rising and falling fast. For so long no one had asked, no one had cared to listen. Her lips quivered as the words spilled out, halting and broken. "My family. We had nothing. After my father died, they forced debts on us we could never repay." Her tears slid down her cheeks as her voice cracked. "They said if I worked, if I served the council, I could pay it back. But every coin I earned, they stole it from me." Her fists clenched, the chain rattling in the silence of her confession. "They waited until I was weak, until I was desperate. Then they threw me here." Cale's eyes darkened as he listened, his chest tightening with anger. He had seen cruelty across the stars, slaves sold for credits, children starved in alleys, whole families crushed beneath corrupt rulers. But something about this girl's story pierced him deeper. Perhaps it was her trembling voice, or the way she clung to hope even when there was none. "They broke you," Kyle muttered, his voice sharp with restrained fury. Liara shook her head, wiping her tears with trembling fingers. "No," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "They tried, but I am still here." Her words were fragile yet defiant, like a candle flickering in a storm. Cale's mask shattered then. The calm traveler, the silent observer, gone. What remained was a man whose heart burned with a fire he could not hide. His fists clenched, his voice rising for the first time. "This is not justice, it is cruelty, and I will not stand by while they destroy you." Liara gasped softly, her tears falling faster. No one had ever spoken for her. No one had ever taken her side. Her chest ached with emotions she had buried long ago. Hope, trust, even something like longing, she whispered. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me?" Cale leaned forward, his voice low but his eyes blazing. "Because I see you, Liara. Not a debt, not a sentence, but someone who deserves to live." The words hit her harder than any chain, harder than any whip. For years, she had been treated like nothing, but in this moment she was everything. The guards returned, their voices louder now. "Human, your time is done. Hand her over, or we will drag you both out." Cale rose slowly, his broad frame casting a long shadow against the torchlight. Liara's breath caught, fear and wonder mixing inside her as she realized he was not going to yield. He stepped to the door, his hand resting lightly on the chain that bound her. "They will not touch you again," he said, his voice low but certain. Liara's hand shook, her lips parting as she whispered, "You'll die. They will kill you for this." Cale turned his head slightly, his eyes finding hers once more. "Then I'll die standing." The guards shoved the door open, their boots thundering into the room. Liara cried out, pressing herself back against the wall, her chains clattering in panic, but Cale stood between her and them. His shoulders squared, his stance unmovable. The torchlight burned across his scarred face, revealing the storm within him. The guards sneered, their blades glinting in the firelight. "You are just one man," one of them growled, raising his weapon, but Cale's voice cut through their threat, firm and unbroken. "Sometimes one man is enough." Liara's heart pounded, her tears falling freely now. She had never believed in heroes, never believed in mercy, but this moment shattered all she thought she knew. The human's mask was gone, his true self revealed. Not a traveler, not a stranger, but a protector. And though the night was far from over, Liara felt for the first time that her fate had changed. The torches outside flickered wildly as the door slammed open. 2 guards stormed in, their blades sharp, their armor clanking with each heavy step. Behind them, shadows of other men lingered in the hallway, eager to claim their turn. Liara's body shook, the chains rattling as she pressed against the wall. Kyle stood tall in front of her, his frame shielding her small figure from their sight. His eyes burned with quiet fury, his jaw tight, his stance unmovable. The guard sneered, one of them raising his weapon. "Step aside, human," the man growled. "Her dead is not yours to decide." But Cale did not move. Instead, his hand brushed the chain that bound Liara, the sound of metal echoing in the silence. "She is not your property," he said firmly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. The guards laughed, mocking his words. "She is sentenced by law, by the council, by the people." Liara's heart pounded, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please, don't do this, they will kill you." But Cale turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers, softening just for her. "Then let them try," he whispered, his words calm yet filled with fire. Something inside Liara broke at those words. Fear, tangled with hope, pulling her in 2 directions. The guards stepped closer, their boots thundering against the stone floor. One swung his blade toward Cale, aiming to push him aside, but Cale moved fast, his arm catching the strike, his other hand slamming the guard back against the wall. The room erupted with noise, Liara gasping as the clash rang through the torchlit chamber. The second guard lunged, his blade flashing in the dim light. Cale twisted, his fist driving into the man's jaw, sending him crashing onto the floor. Blood spattered across the stone, the torchlight catching the red gleam. Liara covered her mouth, her chains rattling as tears streamed down her face. The men outside shouted, banging on the door. Chaos spread through the hallway, boots stomping, orders being barked. Cale turned, his chest heaving, his fists clenched, his eyes unshaken. He stepped back to Liara, his presence towering and steady. "They will not have you." Liara's breath shook, her heart pounding. She had never seen anyone fight for her, never seen anyone risk their life for her. Her voice broke into a whisper. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Cale's expression tightened, his mask of control cracking again. "I know enough," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know what it means to be broken, to be cast aside, to be called less than human." His eyes darkened as his memories flashed. Wars fought, comrades lost, worlds torn apart. "I will not let them do this to you, not while I still stand." The door shook again. Men shouting as more guards tried to push inside. Cale grabbed the chain on Liara's wrists, tugging at the iron locks, but the metal held firm, the cruel sound of clinking echoing in the chamber. Frustration burned in his eyes, yet he did not stop. Liara's tears fell faster, dripping onto his hands as he worked at the chain. Her voice trembled. "They will never let me go. You can't fight them all." Cale looked up, his voice a whisper sharp as steel. "Then I'll fight until I can't breathe." The words struck her deeper than any kindness she had ever known. The door burst open again, This time 3 more. Guards stormed in. The crowd outside roared, the chosen men growing restless, their laughter cruel. But Cale did not step back, his body planted firmly between them and the girl. "You will not touch her," he declared, his voice echoing against the stone. The guards raised their weapons, circling him like wolves around prey. Liara cried out, "No! Stop!" But her voice was drowned by the clash of steel. Cale fought with fury, his fists and strength against their blades. He took cuts across his arms, blood dripping. But his stance never broke. One guard slammed him against the wall, the iron chain cutting into Liara as she flinched. But Cale roared, shoving him back with raw force, sending the man crashing into the others. The torch fell, sparks scattering across the floor, smoke curling in the air, the chamber filled with chaos. Yet Cale stood like an unshaken mountain. Liara's heart raced as she watched him fight, her tears endless. Every strike he took felt like her own, every wound like her own pain. But with each movement, her chest swelled with something she had not felt in years. Hope, terrifying, fragile, but real. At last, the guards stumbled back, groaning and clutching their wounds. Cale stood in the center, his chest heaving, blood streaking his arms, but his eyes steady. He turned once more to Liara, his voice hoarse but unbroken. "They will not have you tonight." Outside, more footsteps gathered, the council's men preparing to storm the room. The punishment was no longer simple. It had become rebellion. Cale's defiance had lit a fire that could not be ignored, and as Liara stared at him, her tears falling, she knew this was only the beginning. The hallway outside shook with noise, angry voices rising like thunder. The chosen men had gathered, their faces twisted with greed and cruelty. They had waited for this night, their coins already paid, their hunger unhidden. Now they roared for their turn, demanding the girl as if she were meat in a market. Inside the chamber, Cale stood firm, his chest heaving from the last fight. Blood dripped down his arm where a blade had cut him, but his eyes did not waver. Liara sat against the wall, her chain still binding her wrists, her body trembling. But her gaze never left Cale. He was her shield, her only fragile hope in the storm. The guards shoved the door open, forcing their way inside once again. Behind them, the first of the chosen men stepped forward, tall and sneering. "This is my right," he growled, pointing toward Liara. "The council has spoken." Kyle's voice cut through the chaos, low but powerful. "Not tonight." The room fell into stunned silence for a breath. Then laughter exploded from the men outside, their voices filled with mockery. "Not tonight?" One jeered. "Then you will fight 10 men and more." Another shouted, "You think you are a hero? You are just a fool with blood on his hands." Kyle ignored their taunts, his hand brushing Liara's shoulder for only a moment. His touch was steady, firm, a silent promise that he would not leave her. Liara's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she whispered, "They'll kill you." Cale only shook his head, whispering back, "They will have to earn it." The first man lunged, a cruel smile across his face. Cale met him head-on, his fist striking the man's jaw with bone-cracking force. The man collapsed to the floor, groaning in pain, the crowd outside gasping in shock. But another rushed in, swinging a heavy chain, sparks flying as it struck the wall. Cale ducked low, grabbing the man's arm, twisting until the chain clattered away. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him crashing into the others. The guards shouted, rushing to restrain him, but Cale fought like a storm unchained. His strikes were brutal, precise, each movement fueled by fire and purpose. Liara's chains rattled as she cried out, torn between fear and awe. She had never seen such defiance, never seen one man stand against so many. Each strike he took made her heart ache, but each strike he gave filled her with strength. Her tears blurred her vision, yet her soul whispered, this man was not like the rest. The chosen men grew furious. Their voices like a pack of beasts denied their prey. "Hold him down," one snarled. "Break him!" "Then the girl is ours." Cale's body shuddered as 2 men pinned him from behind, their arms straining with force. A third swung a club into his ribs, the dull crack echoing in the chamber. Liara screamed, her voice raw and desperate. She pulled, against her chains until her wrist bled, her cry filling the air. "Stop. Please stop. You'll kill him," she sobbed, her tears falling fast. But the men only laughed, their cruelty sharpened by her pain. Kyle gritted his teeth, his vision darkening. Yet even as blood filled his mouth, he roared and tore free from their grip. His elbow slammed into one man's face. His knee drove into another's chest. He fought like a cornered beast, his strength fueled by something greater than survival. The torches flickered wildly, shadows dancing as chaos spread. The men stumbled back, their arrogance cracked by the human's defiance. Kale stood again, blood dripping, his chest heaving, but his eyes burning bright. "You will not break her," he said, his voice steady. "Not while I still stand." Liara's heart broke and healed in the same moment. Her tears blurred her vision, but her chest swelled with something she could not explain. Hope, fragile but fierce, blooming inside the cracks of her fear. For the first time she believed. Maybe she was worth saving. The men outside shouted louder, their rage growing like fire. More of them pressed forward, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. But Kale planted himself before Liara once more, his shadow covering her completely. He did not flinch. He did not yield, though he stood against. Liara pressed her forehead against her chained wrists, sobbing. "Why? Why do this for me? You don't even know me," she cried. Kale's voice came, soft yet unshaken. "Because I do know you, Liara. I know your pain. I know your strength. And I will not let them steal what is left of you." His words cut through her despair, like light breaking into a dark room. The night roared on, the chosen men circling like wolves. But in that small chamber, in the clash of steel and the cry of chains, a new bond was forged. Kale's defiance was no longer just rebellion. It was a vow that before the night of 10 was done, he would fight for her soul as much as her life. The chamber reeked of smoke and blood. The torchlight flickered against broken weapons and groaning men sprawled on the floor. Kyle's chest rose and fell heavily, each breath ragged but unyielding. Liara's wide eyes clung to him, fear and hope clashing within her trembling heart. The hallway outside was no quieter. Shouts echoed, boots thundered, and the council's guards barked orders to one another. The chosen men who had failed inside cursed loudly, demanding revenge. The building shook with the weight of their fury, the punishment no longer a ritual, but a riot. Kale staggered to Liara's side, his hands reaching for the chains that bound her. The iron was cruel, biting into her skin, but he pulled at it anyway. Blood smeared his knuckles as he fought the locks with sheer force. Liara flinched, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You can't. They'll come, they'll catch us." Kyle's voice was hoarse, broken by strain, but steady with resolve. "Then we leave now," he said, his eyes burning with stubborn fire. Liara shook her head, disbelief choking her. "There is nowhere to run, nowhere safe." Kyle leaned closer, his grip never faltering. "Anywhere is safer than here." With one final wrench, the lock cracked open. The chains fell heavy to the ground, leaving red marks across Liara's wrists. She stared at her freed hands in shock, her breath hitching. She had been chained for so long that freedom itself felt unreal. Kyle caught her trembling fingers and pulled her up. "Stay close," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of command. Her knees shook as she tried to stand, her body weak, but his hand around hers steadied her, grounding her in the storm. The door rattled again, a guard's voice barking, "Break it down now." Kale's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the room quickly. He spotted a small window near the ceiling, its frame cracked and loose. "Up there," he said, pointing. "We climb out before they come." Liara stared at the window, panic rising. "It's too high, I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. Kale squeezed her hand, his voice softer now. "You can, I'll lift you," he promised. "Trust me." Before she could protest, the door shook harder, wood splintered, dust. Falling from the frame, the men outside seconds from breaking in. Kyle crouched, his hands gripping Liara's waist. "Go," he urged, pushing her upward toward the narrow opening. Her fingers scrambled against the stone wall, her heart racing. The sounds of boots and curses grew louder behind her. Cale's strength lifted her higher, his voice steady even through his pain. "Climb, Liara, don't stop," he said. "Freedom is waiting on the other side." She pushed with all she had, her shoulders scraping the edges of the window. Her dress tore against the stone, but finally her body slid through. The cold night air hit her face, fresh and sharp. For the first time she felt the stars above like a promise. She looked down, her hand reaching desperately. "Kyle!" she cried, her voice shaking. "Come quickly!" Below, Cale grabbed the window frame, pulling himself up. But the door burst open just as his shoulders cleared the ledge. Guards stormed in, their blades gleaming under the torchlight. "Stop him!" one shouted, rushing forward with fury. Cale gritted his teeth, dragging himself higher despite the pain in his arms. A sword slashed across his leg, blood spilling, but he did not let go. Liara screamed, reaching further, her fingers brushing his. Cale's face twisted in pain. But his hand shot upward, gripping hers tight. With her trembling strength and his raw will, he pulled free from the room. Both collapsed onto the rooftop, gasping beneath the endless night sky. The city below was alive with chaos. Torches lit the streets, shadows of soldiers running in every direction. The alarm bell rang. Its sound, cutting through the night like a blade. Liara's heart pounded as she clung to Kyle, her voice breaking. "They'll hunt us forever." Cale looked at her, his eyes fierce even through exhaustion. "Then let them hunt," he said, his arm steady around her shoulders. She stared at him, tears streaming, unable to understand the strength in his voice. But deep down, she felt the truth. He meant every word. They crawled across the rooftop, the cold wind biting against their wounds. Below, soldiers shouted, "Find them! Don't let the girl escape!" Liara pressed closer to Cale, fear gripping her chest. Her voice trembled. "Where will we go?" Cale paused, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. Far beyond the city walls lay the forest, thick with shadows. "If we reach the trees, they cannot track us easily," he said. Liara nodded weakly, her trust in him the only thing holding her together. Together, they leapt from the roof, landing hard in a narrow alley. Pain shot through their bodies, but they kept moving. Kyle's arm guided her, his steps unshaken even as blood marked his trail. Liara's breath came in broken gasps, but her legs obeyed, driven by desperate hope. Behind them, the city roared with fury. The council's men spread out, the sound of horns echoing through the night. But Kyle did not look back, his hand gripping hers as if he would never let go. For the first time in her life, Liara was not running alone. The forest swallowed them whole. Tall black trees loomed over their heads, their branches scratching at the sky. The ground was wet, mud pulling at their feet with every step. Behind them, the distant horns still echoed. The hunters, spreading wider across the land. Cale's arm held Liara steady as she stumbled. Her legs were weak, her body still trembling from fear and exhaustion. But his grip never loosened. Each step he guided her forward. She clung to his hand as though it was the only thing keeping her alive. They stopped near a stream, its water glimmering faintly. Under the starlight, Cale crouched low, his body shaking, blood dripping from the wound on his leg. Liara fell beside him, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with worry. "You're hurt," she whispered, her fingers trembling as they brushed his torn trousers. Cale gave a small shake of his head. "It is nothing," he said softly. Though his breath betrayed the pain, Liara's tears spilled again, her hands pressing against the wound to stop the bleeding. "It's not nothing. You bled for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Cale looked at her, his scarred face softened in the moonlight. "I would bleed again," he said quietly, "if it means you live." The words struck her deeper than any chain ever could. Her heart ached, fragile and fierce, as though it was learning to beat again. For a long moment the forest was silent except for their breaths. Liara's hands shook as she tied cloth around his leg, each movement gentle, careful, as if she feared breaking him further. Cale watched, her in silence, his chest heavy with something he had long buried. At last, Liara's voice returned, soft but trembling. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her eyes glistening. "Why fight for me? You could have walked away." Cale leaned back against the tree, his gaze fixed on the stars above. "Because I could not," he said, his voice low. "I have seen too much suffering to let it continue when I had the power to stop it." Liara lowered her head, tears dripping onto her hands. "No one has ever chosen me," she whispered. "Not my family, not the council, no one." Her voice cracked, raw with years of buried. "First here, they called me a debt, a curse, a shame to carry." Cale leaned forward, his hand lifting her chin gently. His touch was warm, steady, his eyes burning with quiet truth. "You are none of those things," he said firmly. "You are Liara." The way he spoke her name made her chest tighten, as if she was hearing it for the first time. Her tears blurred her vision, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. Her heart beat louder, fragile hope wrapping around her broken soul. She whispered, "You risked everything, and now you're hunted all because of me." Kyle shook his head slowly. "Not because of you, Liara. Because of what they tried to make you, and because I will never let them succeed." The sound of dogs barking echoed faintly through the forest. Liara's body stiffened, fear rushing back like cold water. "They're coming," she whispered, her hands gripping his arm tightly. Cale's eyes narrowed, his voice steady. "Then we keep moving." He helped her to her feet, his arm strong, despite his wound. Together they pushed deeper into the trees, their steps slow but determined. Every sound in the forest felt louder, the crunch of leaves, the snap of branches, the cry of distant hunters. But Cale never let her go, his presence anchoring her in the darkness. As the night stretched on, Liara's thoughts tangled inside her. She had been condemned, punished, stripped of her dignity. Yet here, in the arms of a bleeding human who refused to surrender, she felt more alive than she had in years. It was strange, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. When they finally reached a cave hidden in the hillside, Cale guided her inside. The air was cold, damp, but it shielded them from the wind and eyes of hunters. Liara collapsed against the wall, exhaustion crashing down on her. Cale lowered himself. Beside her, his arm brushing hers in the darkness, she turned to him, her voice soft but filled with something new. "You saved me," she whispered. "But what will happen now? We cannot run forever." Cale's eyes met hers, fierce and unshaken. "Then we don't run," he said, his tone certain. "We fight, together." Liara's breath caught, her chest swelling with fear and longing. She had never thought of herself as strong, never thought anyone would stand beside her. Yet here was a man who had already bled for her, who had already chosen her when no one else did. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why do you look at me like that?" Cale's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because," he said softly, "I see you. Not as they do, not as chains and debts, but as someone worth more than all the stars above." Liara's heart shattered and healed at once. Her sobs, quiet in the dark. For the first time she allowed herself to believe she was loved. Outside, the galaxy still hunted them. The council still demanded her punishment. But inside the cave, in the silence between two broken souls, something greater was born. Not even the Night of 10 could take it away. Not even the weight of chains, because Cale had chosen her, and Liara had found love where she least expected it.